Chazak. And the Gemara, the last thing we are learning about is Rabbi Yochanan said, we're talking about if you're finding documents in the street, who do you return it to? To the lender, let's say, or to the borrower? And we had Shmuel who said before that we don't suspect that there's a proper document. We don't think the borrower actually paid it back. Why not? Because if he would have paid it back, the first thing he would have done is he would have ripped up the document. The fact that the document still in existence means it probably didn't come from him. It came from the lender. That was Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan came out, disagreed totally, and he said, you don't give it back because we do say that probably he paid it back already. Because why would it lying on the floor? The fact that it's lying around tells us that the Malva wasn't particularly careful about it because it's been paid up. So the other way around, he holds that it was paid up. Okay, so we're up to the bottom of the page, and we brought a Rabbi Yirmiyah Asher Bavu. It says that every shtar document or every obligation that emanates from a bezin, they always give it back to the claimant because definitely you didn't pay it back. So it doesn't show that we say that people don't pay back. So we answered that's talking about a case where the person's been proven to be a liar. And that's why we assume he didn't pay back. He didn't pay it back yet because he's a liar. So up to the bottom of the page, the Gemara says, "V'kafrim," talking about liars. Let's digress a little bit. And since you introduced the idea of somebody who's been an established liar, name a b'milsa. Let me talk about it a little bit and say something interesting. When a bezin puts out a psak, a final ruling, there's two different languages. One language is bezin says, go and pay. Say, go out and pay. The other one is chayiv. There's an obligation for you to pay, which is not the same thing. It's not so direct and it's not so forceful. And the person on the receiving end can even interpret as if the bezin themselves are sort of wavering and they're not convinced 100% that's what their outcome is, and maybe they're going to change their mind. So we're going to make a difference, a distinction whether the bezin said, say, go and pay, or bezin said, chayiv, there's an obligation to pay. And Moshe says as follows. Aram Nachman, they told him, say tenla, they told him, go out and pay. But Amar, and he says a week or two later, but I paid it. Nam is believed. Why is he believed? But he has to swear with the Rabbanan. The says, why is he believed? Because once Bezin made a ruling, he wouldn't worm his way out of that. It's pretty clear cut. You have to pay. He would have paid. However, and furthermore, Ba Malva Lichtov, the Malva says, look, I didn't get paid. Give me a warrant so I can go and seize properties. Ain't kaisim. We will not write it, nor v'noisim, we won't give it to him. Because we believe that the borrower actually paid up after a ruling from a Bezin. But if the Bezin said, there's an obligation to pay, but Amani says a week later, Parati, I paid, and them not believe. The mere fact that you were dragged into court just to get to this point means that you are a very, recalcitrant payer. You're not going to pay when you don't have to. And if there's any way that you can convince yourself, I don't really have to pay yet, we don't believe you did. And over here also, since Bezin didn't say go pay, they said there's an obligation to pay. So maybe he thinks to himself, I'll wait and see what happens. Ba Malva Lichtov. And in this case, the Malva is the one who swears, the lender swears, and he collects. If the Malva says, give me a warrant, Kaisim will write it. The Noisim will give it to him. We don't believe that the borrower actually paid up. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zvi disagrees. He says, it makes absolutely no difference if Bezin said, go pay, or Bezin said there's an obligation to pay. In both cases, we believe that the borrower would have paid. But there is a difference between go and pay or an obligation in a different case, talking about the lying. I mean, there are other cases with differences. For example, a Bezdin, once they gave a ruling, they can no longer try to make a compromise. So we make a difference whether they said, say 10 loy. If the Bezdin says, go and pay, they can no longer try to make a compromise. You have to carry out the din. But if a Bezdin says that, what's it called? Sorry, over there also we say, that there's no difference. Even if the Bezin said there's an obligation to pay, they can no longer make a compromise because the Bezin knows which way the halacha goes. They have to continue and follow the din Torah. So there's no difference by Pshar. Sorry, there's no difference by a compromise whether the Bezin says you have to pay as an obligation to pay. We wanted to make a difference in the case where he said he paid back. However, as we said, it makes absolutely no difference. Once the Bezin makes a ruling, even if they say there's an obligation to pay, and he says a week later he paid it, we believe it. I don't care which wording it is. If he said I paid it, then is believed. But the Malva says he didn't pay me, give me a document that I can seize his properties. We will not give it to him. If you do want to make a distinction between if the rulings, the wording of the Bezin, in the following case, and it goes as follows. They told him, say 10 like. The Bezin made a ruling, go and pay. But Amar Paraiti, and a few days later he says, I paid up. And then Adim, Me'idin Oisa, come along two witnesses and say, Shalai Poto, you didn't pay. Now, how in the world the witnesses know they didn't pay? So there's an argument in Rashi and other Rishonim. Other Rishonim say that he nominated a day that he paid up, and these witnesses come along and say, what are you talking about? You were with us the entire day, you didn't pay anything. Rashi learns an interesting shot. As soon as they exited the Bezin, the lender turned around to the guy and said, pay me. And could Bezin just rule that way? And he says, not interested. I'm not paying you. The fact that he said, I'm not paying you in front of two witnesses right after the court case tells us that he's not going to pay you. So when therefore, he's definitely an established liar. Who's the kafir? He's not been established as a liar when it comes to this money. So when he pays it back, he must have two witnesses to witness that he paid it back. Otherwise, we don't believe for a minute that he paid it back. He's proven to us that at least in this case, he's not to be trusted. But if Bezin said, Bezin said, there's an obligation for you to pay. And Muhammad, he said, I paid it, but it turned out to be that he never did. He didn't pay. A week later, he says, again, I paid. Well, in this case, he's not considered a liar. Now, why not? Because when Bezin said there is an obligation to pay, in his mind, he thinks Bezin, this is not final. Bezin might change their mind. I don't have the money right now, so let me wiggle my way out, and I'll say I paid. It won't bother me, and so on. My timer, he's not trying to be a liar. He's trying to delay because he thinks maybe he's hoping against hope that maybe the Bezin will change their mind. Somebody thinks, or I'll wait till the final outcome before I pay. Omar. So in other words, in Rashi's way, the Gemara makes a lot more sense. He didn't. He just said, I don't want to pay you. The Bezin said you have to pay. He says, I don't want to pay you in front of witnesses. But it doesn't mean that he's a liar or anything else. He's just trying to delay because he doesn't know for sure. He's not convinced the Bezin is going to rule that way. Okay, the Gemara continues further. Further, named Rabbi Yechon. One person says another person, you owe me $100. Another person says, I owe you nothing. Two witnesses go along and say, what are you talking about? You owe this person money. The Chazavami then turns around and says, Paraiti, I paid it. He's contradicting himself. First he said there was no loan. Turned out to be he was a liar. So he said, yeah, I paid it. He's not to be trusted for that money. That Shapsai, who was the son of Rab Marenis, Kosovla Lekalse, wrote to his daughter-in-law, Itzla de Milsabik Savasa. His son was marrying this girl, and his son was promising her dowry. So the father took upon himself the responsibility, or guaranteed that he will take care of this garment that was promised in the Ksuba. The Kibla accepted upon himself. Irchiz Ksubasa, the lost the Ksuba. So then when she lost the Ksuba and she comes to claim the garment, he turns around and says, never happened. Also the Sadi came along with this. He said, yes, Kosovo, you did write it. So then a week later he said, oh, you're right, I paid it to her. Also, they went to in this case, you've proven a liar because you first said you denied that you ever committed yourself. Another Rabbi Yechon, Amar Abulai, Amar Abavin said, Amar Abulai, let's say I owed someone a vow. For example, that person said that I owed that person $100. I admitted to 50. And the other 50 I denied. We learned previously in Rav Gimel that's called a Moed B'Mitzvah, a partial admission. And the Torah says you need to swear. You pay the $50 that you owe, that you admit to, and the other 50 you have to swear that you don't owe it. So I owe it, but I don't have to swear it in a bezin. I can swear it outside of a bezin to the lender. So what happens? I owe this person a shvur, but Omar, and then I turn around a week later. I said, Nishbaiti, I swore to the guy that I don't owe him. I don't owe him any money. But what are you talking about? On that nominated day that you said you swore you were with us, you never swore to anybody. So what happened in this case? And the huchzik kafron is not to be trusted anymore regarding if tomorrow comes along and says, but I did swear again, we don't trust him. When does Ab Ovin's law make sense? It was a shvur that was obligated, mandated by the bezin, and therefore, once the person made up a story that he swore to, he didn't. We don't trust him more. If he arbitrarily decided, he offered, I'm ready to swear that I owe you the money, whatever. He offered to make a shvur. And he offered to make a shvur. And then afterwards, the Edom said, no, swear, and you refused. That doesn't in any way make him a liar, or doesn't in any way prove that he cannot be trusted, because it was his decision. He said, you know what, I'll swear when I'm ready. I don't have to swear when you want me to swear. I don't have to swear in the first instance. Neman, Ovid Inish, comment, the Mikri, the Omar. A person says that, and they'll later they rethink it. Adru Kamel Abba went back to Abba and he said that this din of yours is only if it's a Bezdin's nominated shvur. No, not a Bezdin, I agree with you. I only meant that as well. Itmanami also you're obligated to make a shvur in a Bezdin. So Rabbi Yechon himself said that. It's only if it's a proper shvur in a Bezdin, and when you went outside and the Edom said, no, swear, and you said, I don't want to swear, he's not to be trusted anymore. I swore the Edom, he didn't swear. Who was a kafir? He's considered a kafir for that. He's a liar for that shvur. He's not to be trusted anymore. Okay, we're up to the Gemara here, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, for those who just joined us, and it's I'm not sure where it is in our scroll, but it's in the middle of the bottom wide lines. The last word lines, Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yechon, another Rab Yechon. Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yechon, Rab Asi and Rab Yechon. Hamoitze shtarchoi b'shuk. If somebody finds a document, a loan document in the street, and now when you pick it up, you don't know who to give it back to the lender, to the borrower, and there are three possibilities. One is could be it's a fraudulent shtar. One is could be it was written but was never activated. And one is that it was written and activated, but the guy paid it back, and that's why you found it on the floor. So, but this star kosov by henpik. Now, you learned yesterday that Rabbi Yechon holds that you don't give it back to the lender because it's quite possible the borrower paid it back. But here there was a kosov by henpik. There was actually a stamp on it from the Bezdin, and they verified it's a kosher star. And the kosov by zmani by the but the date on the star, the loan, was that morning. And the question is, even if you believe that you probably paid it back, but in this case over here, when the loan was taken out on that very same day, there's a high probability that he didn't pay it back, and the lender was the one who dropped it. Because the chances that you borrow money and you pay it right back the same day is practically nil. In this case, Rabbi Yechon concedes to give it back to the lender. Why? You worry that maybe it was never activated. The Bezdin gave a stamp of approval. Obviously, it was used. And if you can tell me that maybe he paid it back, to pay back on the very same day, that we don't think it happened. In fact, in the Gemara Bava Metzia Daf, we're going to learn that Shlaki says, there's a chazaka that people do not pay back loans within 30 days. So when there's an argument, when the Gemara says over here that the date on the loan was the very same date that you found the star, according to the Shlaki, which is halacha, do we say that you have 30 days? That entire 30 days, if it's 20 days after the date written on the star, still we don't think you paid it back because people don't pay back. And chazaka ein odem pareya terzmana. But it's actually an interesting discussion, or you have to think about, when we say that you take a loan out for 30 days. What does it mean? Does it mean that I don't owe you any money until day number 30 and that's when the loan starts? Or does it mean I owe you money today, but you have no right to ask me for that money until the 30 days expire? Two ways of learning. And so if you learn that there's no loan at all until 30 days, it makes no difference if it's day 1 or day 5 or day 10. We don't think you pay. But if the loan is there, just that people generally don't pay, so on the same day, you probably didn't pay. Once it comes to day 2, 3, 4, 5, it's quite possible that because the loan is there and the guy got some money, he paid it back. So the Gemara continues. That's what Rabbi Yechon said, but the same day. So the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yechon actually say that. You yourself said in the name of Rabbi Yechon the following did. And the only way to explain what Rabbi Yechon said is to contradict what you just said. And that goes as follows. Shtar a document shalovable, a document that you use to borrow, upare, and it was paid back. Einu chayzer v'loyvabay. No, let's say Reuven lent money to Shimon $100. If somebody can mute themselves, please. If Reuven lent $100 to Shimon, and then Shimon paid it back, and then right away says to Reuven, you know what? Can you lend me another $100? And instead of writing a new star, let's use the same star again, because the amount is the same. And he says the problem with that is you cannot use that star again, because once you cancel it, you cancel it. And once you cancel the star, you cancel the lien on the properties. You cannot reuse it. You have to toss it away. Now let's think for a second. There's another problem there. If let's say Reuben lent money to Shimon in the month of Nisan, paid it back. He has 6 months to pay back. He paid it back 6 months later, and then he says to Reuben, "Okay, let's reuse the star." How can he? The date on the star is from Nisan, and what's going to happen is the lender is going to start. If Shimon has no assets, the lender will go to all the purchasers who bought in the interim period between Nisan and Tishrei when he's totally not entitled to, because this new loan now started in Tishrei. So that's really the problem. Nothing to do with the fact that the star has been used up already, so sort of canceled. The problem is that the date is totally wrong. So it must come to one conclusion, and that is that you borrow the money in the morning, lunchtime you suddenly had this unbelievable windfall, you paid him back, and then suddenly you realize you need money again, so you turn around to him and say, in the same day, can you lend me the money again? We'll use the same star. So this way, you're not hurting. There's not a star mukdim, but the same date. So why can't you do that? The only reason is because once you paid up the star is no longer effective. And therefore, you have to write a brand new star. So what do we see from here? That even on the same day, so we see from here, had it not been for the fact that the star was nimchu, we would say that maybe he paid it back. So we see people do pay back on the same day. Back to the Gemara. Says the Gemara, you said you paid it back. You can't use it again because the lien that the star had on properties is gone, vanished. Amos. The following day or the days after that, that was a date that doesn't marry up with the loan. Why do you have to tell me the problem is why tell me the problem is because the star is no longer effective? The problem is the date is wrong. Now we learned that star hamugdami, that a star chayv that is early psulin is possible if you have the wrong date. We did learn that a Abaya hold that the Eidim, as soon as they sign, activate the lien, but the Gemara is not following Abaya now. Elalav biyoymei. Obviously, it was the same. The date is right. It's not a star mugdim. The date is right, and we say that, and this person wants to pay it up, but he wants to use the same star again. So we see clearly that people do pay on the same day that they borrowed. Why did you say before that people don't pay? Alma party in Shviyam. People do pay on the same day they borrowed. Amalei, he said back to him, Mika Amina, did I tell you the Leipodi Klau? I told you nobody pays. I said Leshchichis. It's very uncommon. Inchi the party of paying the day come. That's all I said. Rav Kahana, however, comes up with a different answer. Rav Kahana says, you want to know why Rabbi Yechanan says you give it back to the original owner? We're talking about Keshachayiv Maida. We're talking about that the loiva can see that he actually still owes the money. And that's why you give it back to the Malbas. You found the document on the floor with a stamp of Bezim, and the borrower said I still owe the money. Of course you give it back to the lender. What's the discussion? What's the chiddush? Much like this. I would have thought, hi, Mifra Pore. Maybe he did pay back. Maybe he paid it back. If he paid it back, so why in the world did he say I didn't pay it back? He wants to use the star again. And why? To save himself the money. Why get lawyers and write new documents? I can save a couple of $1,000. Well, he's just worried about that really he paid it up. And the only reason why he's saying they didn't pay it so he can use the document again. So maybe we should not return it to the lender, because then the lender is going to collect from Lekuchas when he has no right to, because the document's already been paid up. Kamashlam, they're not worried. Now, why aren't we worried? It sounds like a valid concern. We're not worried because the Malva won't allow it. You know why? Because the Malva is very worried. If word gets out that the document he's holding in his hand is worthless piece of paper because it was already paid up, and this is a second loan, then he loses his security. He loses his ability to collect from Lekuchas. So the Malva thinks to himself, why would I be party to this? To help him save money, I'm going to jeopardize my loan. What happens? All my security, I have no security anymore because the star already was paid up, was used, paid up. It's now useless piece of paper. So the Malva won't join in, and that's why we're not worried that the labor paid it back, in order to be able to use the star again. The Malva would never allow it. The Malva would not allow it to happen. Somebody thinks, the Rabbanim will hear, and I'm going to lose out. Why would I do that? Says the Gemara, how is this any different? We learned elsewhere. We learned if you found, we had a stuff your base. You found a loan document and it said as follows. We had the argument here, if the loan document said there's a lien on properties and nobody can collect from these purchasers, you don't give it back to the lender. And we had 5 different ways of learning shot in the Mishnah. Why not? Well, Kimna, the very first way we learned was the borrower admits that he owes the money, and we do not allow it to go back. And why not? Because we are worried that maybe the date is wrong. Maybe they wrote it, but it wasn't actually activated 6 months later, and they're going to take from the purchasers earlier when the loan actually took place. But also, maybe it wasn't written, it wasn't borrowed, the money wasn't borrowed till Tishrei, but they wrote it in Nisan. But also, it'll take from the kuchah, from the purchaser, starting from the month of Nisan, which is not right. Shalai. Now, why are we worried? You're worried that maybe the date is wrong, but if the Malva, why would the Malva then be party to that? The Malva is scared, according to your logic, that if people find out that this shtar was written with the wrong dates, he loses his whole security. So why would he be party to that? The same logic, if the Malva wants to protect himself, won't be party to the same day, using the star again, he won't be party to writing a star with the wrong date. Because if people find out, then he loses all the security. So the Gemara says a big difference. The chance of being found out are very slim because both of them are not going to tell anybody. But what? The Malva's taking a little bit of risk, but he thinks to himself, if I take the small risk, but look at the benefit, I'm going to have access to all of these properties that were sold between Nisan and Tishrei. So I'll take a gamble. I'll use the shtar, and hopefully nobody ever finds out. But in our case, when you borrowed on the Monday morning, you paid it back Monday lunchtime, and you borrowed again Monday afternoon, there were no properties sold between the morning and the afternoon. So the Malva has nothing to gain to go along with this ruse. He has nothing to gain to go along with the scheme from the borrower to save himself money. He wants to reuse the same style. Why would the Malva be party to that? He's jeopardizing his whole security for no gain. That they will never do. The Gemara explains. The most part of the question. Well, I mean, we don't say Dim Kain Malva Gufi Lashavig. The Malva himself won't allow that. He would say, he would say, write a new star because I'm scared I'll lose the Dilma Shami Rabban and Masli, maybe Rabban here, and I'll lose out. The Gemara explains. Amri, I'll tell you why. Hasam over there, in the case of our Mishnah, we don't give it back. I was scared of the scheme that was written in Nisan, but the money was only lent in Tishrei. From the East Levacha. There, the Malva will be party to it because it's benefit. The Kotarif Lekuch is Menisa Tishrei, 6 extra months, additional months, that he has a right, he has access to all of these properties sold. He's happy to take the gamble. And he won't say a word. Over here, what does the Malva gain from going along with the labor's scheme over here to use the same star again? The Malva has everything to lose and nothing to gain. Nothing was sold between the morning and afternoon, but if they find out, if the Bezin finds out that this star was used, he loses the star, and he has no access to get the properties. Written today, my ika the katar of the kuchas b'shtar and the only reason why he cannot use the star again is because we say that, and the only reason is the Malva won't be party to it is because the star loses its shibud. Why would he join in? There is an argument that in a case where they use the star again, which means that he cannot collect any more from Lekuchas. Can the Malva at least use that star as proof that he lent the money so he can collect at least from the borrower directly? Big machlekes in the poskim whether you can even collect from the borrower directly, or we say the whole star is null and void. It's a worthless piece of paper, and therefore you cannot even use it to collect from the labor himself. Says about another Rabbi Yechon. You have quite a few Rabbi Yechons here in this block. If the bezin are the ones who conceived this particular obligation to pay, for example, a ksuva. A ksuva is generally not a personal arrangement between a husband and wife. This is a law mandated by the bezin that every person has to give $100, dollars, let's say, for almana, and 200 for a psula. This is a contract between the bezin and every single individual. That's called ma'aseh bezin. So if somebody claims that he paid up the ma'aseh bezin without showing any receipt, without showing any evidence, he's not to be believed. Loy amaklu. He's not to be believed. My time of why? Because kol ma'aseh bezin, because any ma'aseh bezin command the nokar started b'yadidame. Everyone knows that every married couple has a ksuba. It's as if she's holding on to a ksuba in her hand, and therefore he can say from today to tomorrow, I paid it back, but she's still holding on to the ksuba. Obviously, you haven't paid it back. Even though there's no ksuba here, it's tantamount to holding on to a ksuba. Now, before we learn further, in those days, there were areas that they used to write ksubas, and some places didn't write ksuba. They all relied on the fact that everybody knows that every married couple, she's entitled to a ksuba, and the bezin mandated that, so you don't have to actually write the document. And the only way that the husband can prove that he paid it is he shows a receipt that he paid it up. So what happened was the woman would produce a get, say that she was divorced, and then the husband would have to pay the ksuba. Says the Gemara, do I need you to tell me something? It's written as clear Mishnah that if you claim you paid up something which bezin mandates you have to pay, we don't believe you unless you have a receipt. Where is it? It's see a get. It says in Mishnah. She presented a get. The ain im ksuba, but she did not have a ksuba. There's two ways of understanding this. Either it's a place that everybody has a ksuba and she just lost her ksuba, or it's a place that no one has a ksuba and she just showed her get like everybody else, and now she's collecting her ksuba. Goiv ksuvasa, she collects her ksuba. So he's saying, you see, the husband obviously is saying, I paid it back. Otherwise, why is she from a bezin? The husband is saying, I already paid you the ksuba. We don't believe the husband, and she collects. So we see clearly, Rabbi Yechon, your din that hatoyin acha ma'aseh bezin lo klum is a clear Mishnah. Omle, Rabbi Yechon said, if I wouldn't have lifted this clay shard from the ground, you never would have found the precious stone underneath it. What exactly he's saying as follows. He's saying, now that I told you this din, you go to the Mishnah, you understand the Mishnah. If I wouldn't have revealed this halacha, you never would have said the Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, had this malach that he used to learn with, have exchanged, wrote a sefer called Magid Mesharim, interesting sefer. One of the things it says there, you have to eat cheese or milchiks on Rosh Hashanah. Anyway, so Rabbi Yosef Cairo came across a difficult Gemara or Rambam, and he just couldn't make headways. And he spent a number of days working at it. Finally, suddenly he had a brilliant idea that popped in his head, and he figured it all out. And he's so proud of himself. Comes to shul, he sees there were a couple of guys learning, and they were learning the very same Rambam or Gemara that he was learning. And one of them asked the very same question that bothered him, and the other one just on the spot gave exactly the same answer that Beis Yosef had, and it bothered him to no end. Here he spent, Rabbi Yosef Kara spent a number of days to figure out shot, and these guys, instantly they came up with the same shot. So he asked this malach, and the malach said to him, this seichel was not in this world, but once you brought it down from Gan Eden into this world, now everyone has access to it. And Rabbi Yechon is basically saying the same thing. Once I brought down this halach and I revealed to you this aspect, now everybody can go to the Mishnah and understand the Mishnah but I brought it out. Tracy actually asked, where do you find the diamonds underneath clay shards? Go look for underneath all the clay shards in the world. You won't find any diamonds. Tracy is talking about underneath in the seabed. Maybe you're talking about pearls. In the seabed, you can find precious stones underneath rocks and all that. Okay, let's continue. Comes along Abaya says, I don't see the diamond in this Mishnah at all. In fact, I look at this Mishnah, I can tell you, for argument's sake, the Mishnah has nothing to do with Hatoyin Achamaise Bezin. Maybe we're talking about it here. I'm going to buy my Maganisa. Where do you see a gem over here? Maybe we're talking about a place that nobody writes a ksuva, and the Mishnah says they produce the get. Not that the get, what do you call it? Prove that she's married. The get, get became the ksuva in a place where there's no ksuva. So how do they collect? The get itself, the fact that she was divorced, that bill of divorce is the ksuva. So she had a document. And that's why we don't believe the husband. Not because it's Maisa Bezin and there's no paperwork or anything else, but Bezin says you have to pay. We say the only way that you can prove that you paid it is by having a receipt. No, here there was a document. What was the document? The get. But since nobody writes a ksuva, the document the get becomes the ksuva. And therefore she shows the get and she collects. The get, the get is a ksuva. But what about in a place where you have two separate documents? One is the get and one is the ksuva. If the woman does not present the ksuva, she doesn't get anything. We believe the husband. If she's holding ksuva, she'll collect you. So Rabbi Yochanan has no proof from it. Just because you produce the get is the ksuva. Then Hodor Abai is thinking to himself when he's having these discussions. We actually had a number of places. Abai said one thing, then he changed his mind. Abai says, what I said is not correct. Why? But if you're going to say what I'm saying, that a person says, I paid up a Maisa Bez and he's believed. Over here, he's not believed only because she has a document. What document does she have? A get. And the get supplants the ksuva. These are that of the mokshe kais ksuva. What would be a din if in the place you do write a ksuva? If she has a ksuva, fine, doesn't. In other words, in the place where you have a ksuva, you need to have a ksuva, otherwise you don't collect. So that's the question. Almana, a widow, right? So there's no divorce at all. A widow, it's a place where you normally write ksuvas. So she would have a ksuva in her hand and she would collect. If she has it, fine, otherwise no. But a widow from engagement, where the din is she's still entitled to collect a ksuva, but there's no document written. Because we know under the chuppah is when you have the ksuva, right before the chuppah. So no document is written from the time of engagement. So how in the world is she going to collect the ksuva? She's supposed to have a ksuva. She doesn't get one. She doesn't receive a ksuva because she's only engaged. She doesn't have a get to show because she's a widow. So she doesn't receive a ksuva. So what was the point of the Rabbanan making a special law that a woman who's engaged is entitled to a ksuva when she'll never get it? If the husband dies, the children will say, prove it, you never received the ksuva. And she can't prove anything. So it must be that even in the place where you write a ksuva or you don't write a ksuva, we do not believe anyone who says they paid up a ma'aseh bezin unless you have a receipt. He said it follows. How can you collect babies if our husband died? Let them say that we paid up. If you say the woman doesn't collect, what was the point of making a law that a almana from engagement receives suva when she'll never will get? Rav Chizda had two sons. One was called, it's very strange that the Hamoraim generally did not have Jewish names. The Tanaim all had Jewish names practically, and except the very few that didn't. And in fact, the Maram Shik made a whole campaign that you have to have Jewish names and you shouldn't go by your Goyish names. And he called his family name Shik, which is an acronym for Shin Yud Kuf Shem Yisrael Kodesh. That we have to make sure that our names are holy and we should maintain our Jewish names. Mar Kshisha means senior and Mar Yenuka is junior. Those are the names of the two children of Chizda, senior and junior. No other name associated with it. And there's an argument, Tesis has a discussion in Babasa of Zion Beis. We'll see when we get there. What is Kshisha, the older one? Kshisha means the senior. Was he actually the older one or the younger one? You would think he's the older one, senior. But Tesis, maybe others say he was the younger one. He was born when Rav Chizda was a senior. And Mar Yenuka was born when Rav Chizda was young. The only problem with all this is Rav Chizda was the teacher of Rava. Rava was the teacher of Rav Ashi. No, sorry, Rava. The Gemara says in Gittin, the day that Rava passed away is the day Rav Ashi was born. So how in the world did Mar Shisha, which is the oldest son of Rav Chizda, have a discussion with Rav Ashi? When Rav Ashi was only born, when the Rava, who was a student of Rav Chizda, passed away. Anyway, unless Mar Shisha was very, very old, and Rav Ashi was very, very young, but Mar Shisha should be asking Rav Ashi a question in halacha. The whole thing's a bit strange. Anyway, we assume right now that a widow from an heiress is entitled to ksuva, but you don't give her a document. So he said, how do we know that a widow from heiress, we know that you're married, you get entitled to ksuva. How do you know from engagement? Said the mother, how do you know she's entitled to ksuva? Maybe from the following mission. Now we learned. This Armel Gasha became a widow or divorced, whether just merely engaged or whether married. She collects everything. She collects everything means she collects the standard ksuva plus any additional promises that the husband made. Called Tosefes ksuva. She collects everything. So it says clearly here, she was from Mina Erison and she collects. So what's it ayah? Maybe here the husband personally wrote her a ksuva. We're talking about whether the Bezin mandated for women who are merely engaged to have a ksuva. How do you know? In this mission here is talking about where the husband decided to give a ksuva to his wife. He wrote her, and therefore, if he died, she's entitled to it. Says the Gemara, isn't that obvious? Isn't that obvious? If the husband wrote a ksuva and he died, then obviously the state has to pay her out. Says the Gemara, no, it's not so simple. Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azai is of the view, why did the fiance give her a ksuva? Because he was madly in love with her and he wants her to be happy. But had he known that they never would have cemented their marriage, who said he would have given her ksuva then? So therefore, Rabbi Elazar actually says that she doesn't collect. And the chiddush is we don't follow Rabbi Elazar ben Azai. The only reason why he offered her a ksuva is because he intended to marry her. And now it didn't work out. When he died, maybe the state doesn't have to give it to her. In fact, I'll prove it to you. We're talking about a case where the husband wrote his own ksuva, not by the law, because it says he collects everything. What do you mean everything? If it's what the Bezin mandate, what is the Bezin mandate? The halacha, 100 for a widow and 200 for a psula. What everything means, it was more written in the ksuva. So obviously we're talking about a ksuva that was written between a husband and a wife, not the standard ksuva that the Bezin mandates. He wrote it, he collected everything, including the additional things. He didn't write, my goyim women everything. She's only entitled to the 100, 200. So where do we know that a woman who's merely engaged is entitled to ksuva? It says in a brisa, ishtay arusa, somebody's wife. If you're merely engaged, loy oinen, she passes away, you don't have to behave like an oinen. We don't do mitzvahs. The loy metamla, if he's a kohen, he does not go to the funeral because they weren't married yet. So too she, loy oinenes, for husband, if he dies, she does not behave like an oinen, nor loy metamla. Now she's allowed to go to a cemetery, but I mean those 7 people that a kohen is allowed to metame is actually a mitzvah to go to their levaya. And she does not have the mitzvah to go because it's not really her husband. Mace, if she died, Einu Yosha, he does not inherit her. Mace, but if he dies, Goyvik Ksuvasa, she collects a ksuva. So clearly here, we're talking about a woman who's merely engaged, and yet she collects a ksuva. Says more the same thing. The Kosala, maybe we're talking about a case where he wrote for her, and therefore she collects a ksuva, not like Elazar Zaya. If you're going to tell me, either because he wrote a mile, remember what's a chiddush. So first we could answer what we said just before. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that the ksuva is meaningless if they don't eventually get married, and we're telling you that it's meaningful. But otherwise, another reason, the main chiddush, the primary chiddush of this brayso is Mesa, if she dies, Eino Yosha, he does not inherit. You would have thought that if she's entitled to the ksuva from him, so it's the other way around. If she dies, he's entitled to yashn her, and he tells us no, he does not yashn her at all. That's what the brayso is there for. So therefore, we still don't know. How do you know that a woman who's merely engaged is entitled to a ksuva from Ma'aseh Bezin? So the Gemara concludes, you're right. We don't know. But Abaye goes back and says, still, that Mishnah is a proof to Rabbi Yochanan from the very Mishnah itself, and I'll prove it to you. What would I say? I said that the get becomes the ksuva. That the get becomes the ksuva. How wrong can I'm wrong. He said, you know why I'm wrong? Because a ksuva has to nominate an amount. Nowhere in the get, in the format of the get, is it written how much money he's entitled to. So clearly the get is not the ksuva. The get is just to tell us that she's divorced. What is the ksuva? Nothing. Maisa Bezin. Bezin rule that every married woman is entitled to a ksuva. And yet if the husband said, I paid, he's not believed. That's support to Rabbi Yochanan. That the only way the husband will believe this, he has a receipt. He changed his mind to the mission itself. These are not motion crazy ksuva skin. We're talking about a place where nobody writes a ksuva. And the get becomes the ksuva. The get hangs also ought to get mana masaying ksiba. Where does he get the amount of money? The chi tema. But if you could tell me 1 second. Since everyone has exactly, it's a uniform price. Everyone has the exact same price. It's as if it's written in the get. Since the Rabbanan said this is the amount that you're entitled to, command the kasev beidam, and everyone's exactly the same. So therefore, it's as if it's actually written in the get that if you're a psula, this is the amount and whatever. So then, litain. So then we can still say belema paraiti. Let him argue that I paid it back. If you're going to tell me that this is the document, why can't I say I paid it back? Now, why are you going to tell me we're not going to believe him? You know why we don't believe it? You have a document there. You know what? Because why does she have the document? If you paid it back, you should have the get in your hand. The fact that she still has the get, which we treat like a ksuva, means you haven't paid it yet, right? If you paid her, you should have ripped it up. Nobody tells us. She refused to give me the get because she claims she wants to get remarried. She's going to move to another city. No one knows who she is. How is she going to prove that she's divorcee and she's allowed to marry again? So she needs to retain that get. She refused to share it with me. He tells us, she didn't allow us. She didn't allow me. She didn't want to get back to me. She claimed, this is what the husband is saying. The reason I say I paid it up. You want to know why I don't have the get or which is the ksuba in my hand? Because she said, I need it to get married again. So therefore, but I did pay. If you're going to tell me, we say, you should have, there's an alternative. There's another option. You can rip the get, but give it back to shreds and write on the back, or even a little rip and write on the back that the reason why we ripped the get is not because it's a disqualified get, but because the ksuba was paid up. Right on the get, the karuna that we tore, not because it's a possible get. I don't want to collect again. And therefore, so let's say that you could have let's say to him, if you really paid up, you should have ripped up the get. So the Gemara says, "Ought call the magbi beidin and magbi." You think when she comes and claims a ksuba, you think they do it in front of Bezin, do it out in the street. Most people don't know the law. People think you rip up the get. She thinks that if you rip up the get, it's useless. You can no longer prove that she's a free woman. So therefore, she doesn't let her read the get, and therefore we should believe him that he paid up. Why don't we believe him that he paid up? Must be because because a ksuva is something that Bezin mandated. It's not like a loan that we created an obligation between ourselves. This is something that Bezin passed down. You're not believing you paid it up unless you actually have a receipt in your hand. Okay, we'll stop here. Continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.